Let's get started. I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7:04 p.m. We'll take a moment of silence to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, let's do the pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the
flag
flag
of the United States of
States of
America
America,
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
visible
liberty,
liberty,
and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, I have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Dixon,
Present.
Mr. Rollins.
Here.
Mr. Scrivano.
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch.
Here.
Mr. Siegel.
Here.
Mr. Connor.
Here.
Ms. Stanford.
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. We are now at the petitions and communications portion of our meeting when we invite the public to make comments. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the rights of citizens to petition their government as well as provides for freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special meetings for public comment. Thus, we are following those mandates during this petitions and communications portion of our agenda. According to Board Policy 2.230, the public comments portion of the meeting is limited to a total of 30 minutes. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it is appropriate, you'll be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. In order to allow sufficient time for the business of the board and to conduct our meetings in an efficient and effective manner, we are requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes. We do not have a clock on the wall, but we have Connor, who's going to be our timekeeper tonight. So it's not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. We have 2 speakers tonight. The first speaker will be Shavina Baker, to be followed by Scott Anderson. Ms. Baker, you may start.
Well, good evening, everyone. I hope that you are all safe and healthy at home. I just wanted to start with thanking you for your consideration for our charter renewal. I have taken some time since the last time that we met and have been very reflective. And the first thing that I want to share is that the same concerns that were brought up at our last meeting with the board are also my concerns. I wanted to just take a brief minute or two just to talk about the partnership that we currently have with the Illinois Empower through ISB. We are regularly communicating and meeting all of the requirements of the state partnership. And we're also working monthly with our student support manager, Dr. Catherine Mosch. Some of the highlights of what has transpired over the last 18 months is the fact that we have transitioned our school into a K-5 building, focusing on those foundational skills that we had talked about in our last meeting. We've also, again, very importantly, put people in place, including our executive director, Mr. Mike Williams, as well as new management through our CSO. We have hired qualified and very invested teachers to our staff, and we will continue, if we are renewed, to keep the bar high, not just academically, but also the culture and climate of our students. We will also be continuing our e-learning that started April 1st, and will continue to service students to our highest ability with online instruction as well as progress monitoring that will be able to collect data even in this time of a pandemic, so that when we are back to school, we will hit the ground running. I thank you for your time and your consideration.
Yeah, very good, thank you. Mr. Scott Anderson is next.
Good evening. First, I'd like to say thank you to the board for allowing the chance to speak and for consideration of the Jackson charter renewal. I want to make it clear from the beginning that this isn't so much a vote on Jackson. This is a vote for our families that are most in need in our community. We serve families that have chosen us over the standard model and or are looking for an alternative to the standard model. And I would ask the board to consider, if not us, then what for those families? I'm not an educator, I'm an operations executive. I have decades of experience in organizational turnaround. And I will tell you that over the last near period of time, this organization has done all of the things that are necessary to set the stage for future performance. We have the right people in place with Executive Director Mike Williams and Principal Shavina Baker. We have the right organization in place with separation amicably and mutually from the Chicago Charter School organization. We're in the right geographic location. We've right-sized to a K-5 organization. And we have demonstrated performance with those children who actually have spent time with us. Those that are with us for 2 to 4 years show incredible improvement in performance. And so we've done all those things that are in place to make sure that we are serving those families that are most in need, demonstrating improved performance, and all of the foundational pieces are there. We understand, we own, and we embrace the concerns that the board may have. We share those and we have those concerns as well. But the foundation is in place for demonstrated outcomes, and we would ask the board to consider that and support our families most in need.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I would ask at this time if there are any board member comments. Please state your name and I'll call on you.
Mike Connor.
Mr. Khan.
Yeah, my comment is this. I don't know how much people have paid attention to some of the offerings that are happening countrywide. One is that there are schools that are actually closing right away. And I'm not suggesting any of this, but I'm just saying it would be interesting for people to look at some of these trends. So number one, there are schools that are closing right away before the end of the school year. Very interesting. There are obviously schools that are, going to have their regular time period they're going to close. And then there's a lot of folks that are anticipating we may not have school in the fall. So I think we've been talking as a board about what our options are in our planning, but I think what I would ask is that we do give some thought to the entire topic of what if this extends, what are some of the strategies that various school districts have employed at this time, because I think that there's not going to be any easy answers, and I'd like us to be prepared. And what I'd like to suggest is that we have this as a topic for the board. And I know that the administration is working on this, but I think it would make sense to set aside some time, probably at a committee of the whole, for this to be a topic where we address it for a bit of time.
Okay, thank you. Other board members, state your name if you would like to speak.
Hey, Ken, it's Jude.
Okay, Jude, Ms. McCullough.
Hey there. I wanted to actually give a shout out and a thank you to the administration. Crusader Clinic came to us and asked for a rapid response and assistance in setting up that testing site at Auburn. And the administration, next responded immediately, was out there the next business day, helping them find a location. And I think it's those kind of cooperative activities with the community that really showcase our willingness to be a part of the community. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other board member comments?
Hey, Ken, just
Yes, Mr.
piggybacking,
Dixon.
just piggybacking on what McCall said, Mr. Jude McCall said, just get a shout out to the lunch individuals that have been giving out lunch and serving breakfast. They've been committed. We started off with 4 and we ended up with 8. I don't know where we exactly stand right now, but they risked to help. They went out to help the different neighborhoods and communities. And I want to give a shout out to them.
Okay, thank you. Good, great idea. Okay, anyone else? All right, we'll move on to our consent portion of our agenda, including the following: the minutes from April 14th, 2020, payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, construction bid request log, the RFP for uniform security officers, the RFP for the wellness program administrator, the recurring contracts for Rockford Marlins and RPS partnership, the fiscal year 20 actuarial and benefits consulting services for post-employment benefits valuation and early retirement obligations, and the Lamar companies from Dr. Vosberg on the recognition for seniors, addendum to the Sunrise Transportation contract, Comcast Internet Essentials sponsored services, and the other consent items, including the monthly cash and investment report for March of 2020, the fiscal year 2020 third quarter treasurer's report, the continuous public official bond and payment of premium, the financial results for March 2020, the adoption of the 2021 proposed board meeting schedule, the employment agreement for our general counsel, and the freedom of information law. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
This is Mike Connor, so moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
It's Tim Rollins, second.
seconded by Mr. Rollins. Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration?
Okay, this is Jude. Let me give you a list.
Okay,
7, B as in boy.
okay,
8A,
okay,
C, D, and E, which means you just have to vote on all 8 pieces individually, because that only leaves B out there, I think, right?
okay.
Oh, no, you can still, you know what, I
B
think
was,
I'm going to pull all of 8. Let's do each one separately, because I want an explanation
All right.
on B as well. And then, I think I got all the ones that I was aware of.
Okay.
Thank you.
other board members that want anything pulled?
Ken, this is
David,
Tim.
go ahead.
I'd like 7A pulled.
7A,
That's it.
okay. Any others? Okay, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the consent items not pulled.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yeah.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes,
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes,
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
okay, so we'll go through these ones that were pulled in order. So I'll take a motion and a second to approve item 7A, that is the RFP for uniform security officers.
So moved. This is Mr. Connor.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second, David Siegel.
second by Mr. Siegel. Questions or discussion?
Well, this is Tim. I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to, given some of the other discussions that we've had. So this is a service contract. And I just want to make sure it's just an RFP. There's no contract attached. But I would like to ask the administration to make sure that we have both a fairly robust force majeure provision in this contract, and that we are only obligated to provide for services actually provided.
here,
Okay.
here.
Yeah, okay. Any other comments from board members?
This is David Siegel. Mine's far less technical. I just noticed that one vendor was grossly over what the other vendors proposed. That was Fact Finders Group. I also noticed that they had put in a FOIA request in regards to this, and was wondering if they were offering something that the other vendors were not. Did they just misunderstand what the request was? It's just interesting to figure out how someone could be so far out of the ballpark.
Mr. Dotson, I bet you know the answer to that.
So I don't. Good evening, everyone. Fred
Good
has just
evening,
been texting me, telling me he's having internet connection issues. I was not part of the evaluation committee, and I don't see Dane is here either. So Fred is trying to log on here, so if there's a way to just give him some time to get on here and answer some of those questions.
Okay.
Well, while he's doing that, this is Jude. I would
Hey,
ask
Mr.
why.
Siegel,
Oh, I'm sorry. So when Fred gets on with the answer to David, is that your question? Was that your
Yes.
question, the difference?
Did Fred log on?
Looks like I see him logging on now.
Okay.
yeah, I'm here. I
Okay.
didn't catch Dave's question because it was in and out.
Okay. Well, Mr. Siegel, would you repeat your question to Fred?
Yeah, so we had several vendors submit on this proposal, and one of them was just a ton more expensive than the others, and was just wondering why that might be. Were they offering something that we had not asked for? And I was pretty sure that they had made a FOIA request for something, but now that I'm looking at the FOIA log, I'm not. Oh, it was for something else. That was actually Andy Frain's services. Never mind. But what was it about fact finders, and why were they so expensive?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but everybody was pretty much bidding on the same process. We had a pre-bid meeting that was mandatory. Everybody sitting at the table got the opportunity to ask questions. We went over the bid specs. And yes, we had quite a range of prices. Two particular companies came in close to one another. Securitex was by far the lowest bidder. The
Right.
second bidder was off a couple of cents. It wasn't very far apart. Securitex has definitely proven they're capable of doing this. They're our current provider, and they've been running about an 85 to 90% satisfaction level since they've been providing for us.
Yeah, and I have no problem with continuing on with them. I was just wondering if there was something that that just happened with fact finders. That's fine. They're just more expensive, and that's fine.
Do you have a further question?
Can
No.
I do? This is Jude.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Mrs. McCullough.
So I had this conversation, and we'll have this in a minute when we talk about the wellness piece, but if someone's going to bring to us these sort of RFPs, I would think everybody would be bidding on the same thing. So I'm not understanding why Andy Frain and fact finders differentiate administration, schools, and construction. I mean, I think if our bid went out and said, this is what we want for all locations, and we had one number, then everybody would give us one number, and that comparatively would be easier to do. So is there a reason that you allowed them to disaggregate by location instead of just saying, give us a number for all these locations? For all locations, I'm sorry. I would like, as a board member, to see it be more consistent. So why is it not? Fred?
Mr. Deal, there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I don't know the process they used to come up with the numbers that they came up with. Andy Frain has bid on this before, and they were not in the ballpark. If I can remember correctly, this was about the same price spread that they had the last time that they bid on it. We had a local company also submit a bid that wasn't considered because they weren't in attendance for the mandatory pre-bid meeting, and their pricing was very far apart from the two that were the best prices.
Fred, that doesn't answer my question. The question was,
Mrs. McCullough,
why-
let me jump in because I think it was very clear what you're asking. I don't think Mr. Deal is in a position to answer this. So what I'm going to do is bring this back to Dane. There's a concern that has been raised about uniform bid specs and making sure that prices are not differentiated in a way that makes it difficult to compare them apples to apples. And Michelle will bring that back to Dane and the team for further review to ensure that whenever possible, we do not have one price that is consistent and another is disaggregated.
Okay,
Thank you.
so 7A will be pulled and moved to another board meeting. So now I will take a motion and a second to approve item 7B, which is the Wellness Program Administrator.
So moved. This is
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second by Mr. Dick.
second by Mr. Dixon. Comments, questions, or anything?
Yes, this is 7B. So one of the reasons why I wanted this for is because we know that over anything that's over 100, over 25,000 has to be bidded out, a competitive bidding. And so when we look at these three different prices, we see there's a difference of about a little under $150,000. Now, I did some investigation, so I know why we went that way. But as the public, it shows that we have not been committed. We didn't break. If you were to look at it, it looks like we broke codes because we went with the highest cost instead of the lowest. So I want to give the opportunity for the administrators to explain that on record because I think that's appropriate.
Sure.
Yeah, appreciate that, Mr. Dixon. Thank you. So during this process, on this bidding process, it does appear that Interactive Health has the highest price. When you break down each company, first and foremost, Wellness Workdays, when they bid, and to Mrs. McCulloch's point, every company bid on the same specs for our wellness, answered the same questions that were put forth in the bid. And Wellness Workdays did not offer the 36 panel test that we have given our employees over the last 7 years. They do not offer that test at work sites. And so part of our wellness program is that we offer screenings at each school to offer flexibility to our employees that start very early in the morning before school starts to be able to conduct these tests. So Wellness Workdays actually would not be able to perform the actual screening, biometric screening that we need performed for our employees and what we have traditionally done for our employees. So they were voted third out of all three from the group that evaluated off the rubric. When you look at Active Health, you see that they were slightly lower than Interactive Health. Active Health has a per employee per month total of 27,000, and then you include the biometric screenings at 286,000 or short, a little bit over that. Those are some a la carte prices. So Active Health only offered a 15 panel biometric screening as their base package. And in order for us to get to the 36 panel that we needed, we would have to order individual tests for each employee. We also, with both Wellness Workdays and Active Health, would have to order extra things for our employees that would follow privacy, such as privacy screens. Those cost additional, both with Active Health and Wellness Workdays. With the interactive price, we get our 36 panel blood draw that our employees are used to. It's a one set price. There are no additional a la carte pricings that you need to have. Privacy screens are included. They also include the fact that we can have 15 appointments at elementary schools versus 20, which again lends itself to having this biometric screening through our wellness process at more buildings. The last couple of years with our previous provider, because they made it a 20-person limit, we had to combine some schools because of the number of employees at schools didn't meet the 20-person limit. And then we get charged extra if we don't have 20. And so when you look at all cost in, Interactive's bid was an all cost in and nothing that we would have to order extra or potentially actually have increased costs due to maybe a higher participation rate or other things that we may need.
Okay.
So when we gave the bid out, the perspectives of the bid, where all of that was all that in the bid sheet, so when they knew what to give us. I'm sorry, you said that, yeah. I missed. Okay.
Yep. So Wellness Workdays, their response was that they could perform the 36 panel, but really what that performance means is that they would vendor that out to all the different labs around the Rockford region, which means that our employees are going to different labs. The process may
Okay.
not be the same, and it would all be all over. So their response was, we could do it. We just can't do it at your schools or your sites. We would send your employees across the Rockford region to different labs to be able to execute that.
Got
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes, go ahead.
You still need a vote on the security guard contract. So this conversation is a little bit premature.
Oh, I thought administration pulled the security one.
I did not. I was suggesting that I would be responsive by bringing that to Michelle and Dane to
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
follow up in the future. But I think we clearly have a low bid here, and this
Okay.
is more of a discussion about
I
making
see.
sure we provide more clarity moving forward. But I don't think this impacts who we selected.
Okay, I misunderstood. Okay, so we do have a motion and a second on the uniform security officer bid. So I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of item 7A.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, now I will ask, are there any more comments or questions for Mr. Zediker on item 7B, the wellness program?
This is Jude. Yes.
Go
Can
ahead,
I ask
Ms. McCullough.
something?
Yes.
So I'm going to say the same thing I said for the other. You said the specs were in there, but how specific were you on the specs to make sure that they knew they had to provide 36 panels, so they knew they had to provide it in-house, they knew that privacy screens were included, they knew that we needed the 15-person limit. So if all those specs were in there and they couldn't meet them, why would you even bring it to us? Because they didn't meet the bid process, right?
Yep. So those were the top three. The reason that we pulled forward is to show the board of the top three that we had that submitted on time that the committee considered. The 15-person interactive health was an added benefit. The 20-person was the absolute minimum we would go with. Each company was provided that, and their answers differed. So Active Health's approach, or the way they do this, is their base is a 15 panel. So they included all of the other tests that we would need to make the 36 panel, and then gave us the pricing for that. So their model is a 15 panel. And then their model from a business perspective is to curtail that to different industries and different organizations so that they have that a la carte model. So each one gave responses to the bid, but how they were going to accomplish each one of those varied just slightly.
But what you presented to us as a board is not reflective. I mean, it has to be explained. I think that when I open it up and I look at it, I should be able to just tell. I shouldn't have to have an explanation from legal as to why that one is why, even though they vary, you can add two together and call this one. Maybe it's just the way you're presenting it to us as compared to just what they're presenting. But if somebody can't meet the specs in your bid, let's say there's nobody else bidding, and so we might not have a choice. But if there is somebody who's meeting the specs, I'm not sure why you're bringing it forward with somebody who's coming with saying, well, we can't do that. We're going to farm it out to so-and-so.
Right. So, I mean,
because it should be a total for each place. The
Yeah, so
total should be there for each of them. And I'm sitting here having to add them up and figure out what I'm adding and that. So I as a board member, I don't want to work that hard.
Sure. I would say in response to your question, they technically all could meet the specs. They just all would try to meet those in various ways. So Wellness Workday's way of meeting some of our specs would be to outsource some of the work to subcontractors.
Doesn't matter to me. I just want to know what the cost is.
Yeah, I think that's into. We should have had it in the cost in the sheet, that we shouldn't have to ask, hey, so why is the difference? Then you'll come back and give us a response. And so I think we should have that up front, the cost, and the public should have that up front, what the total cost is, instead of piecing it together.
So that's why we provided the legal update, and in the future, we will put it into the executive summary. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
That's it. I think that, any other comments or questions?
Nope.
Okay, I have the coordinator then call the roll on approval of item 7B, the wellness program administrator.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, we'll move on to item 8A, which is the Rockford Marlins RPS partnership. Can I have a motion and a second to approve that?
This is Mike Connor, so moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor. There a second?
Second.
Second. This is David
Second by
Siegel.
Mr. Dixon, I believe. Comments,
Okay.
questions?
So I'll go. Should I go first? Tim, you want to go? No?
It doesn't matter.
Okay, I'll try to keep it short. I promised I would. Because this contract got pulled. This is the third time we're seeing it because when we had conversations as board members individually, we had issues with what was being presented as in-kind services, as missed opportunities, as value that wasn't taken. At the end of the day, it's a 7-year contract. At the end of 7 years, we somehow have not figured out how to find what kind of in-kind services the district is actually interested in. Our middle schools aren't taking advantage of the week-long training sessions, and that's 20,000 there. We've got errors in the contract, so we're charged twice for putting blocks in at Eisenhower School, the 5,000. When I asked the question, I actually talked to the coach today. When I asked the question how they decided what they would charge for the middle school meet, she said, well, she just charged what her predecessor charged. So nobody's sitting there and looking at hours and the time that somebody, by the way, has a microphone on and there's kids in the background. Does anybody know who that is? So anyways, there was she said, I just used the numbers that they used previously. I asked her why they didn't come up with some other ideas since in their notes, they keep saying, we don't understand why people don't take advantage of this. I said, well, did you come up with some other ideas? And she said, no, administration seemed to think everything was fine. And there was no reason to come up with other ideas. At the end of the day, for me, when I voted on this, the biggest part was that we were going to help economically disadvantaged students. If you take a look at that scholarship program, only half of those scholarships are being used consistently, and that's only like 5 students. So I don't think that we're getting what our money's worth or our in-kind service worth out of this contract. We established a policy, I'll say it for you, Tim. We established a policy for rental and of our facilities. And I don't have I think it's great. We're trying to grow programs, but I'll ask you to take a look at Kennedy and how much that program has grown. That Kennedy pool is not even wet. We never put water in it this year. We have had no classes in it this year, and there aren't any kids in the Marlins from Kennedy. We don't have a swim team from Kennedy. Those are the kind of kids I'd love, the kind of students that I'd love to see take advantage of a scholarship program. But if you put it at Eisenhower School, how are students from the far west side going to get to and from? I mean, you're already getting a scholarship because you can't afford the club, but then on top of that, now you have to figure out transportation on a daily basis. So if we really wanted to have a good relationship, we would have revisited it, what was in the best interest of the district and of our students, and how to move them forward as athletes, as student athletes. Our administration has given us a list of names of wonderful accomplishments by students in the swimming and diving arena over since the life of this contract. And I will tell you that all 3 names that they gave us on there were not swimming for the Marlins. One was swimming for the Boiling Group, one was swimming up with the Hananiga group, and the other's a diver, and Marlins don't do diving. So let's look at what we're really getting out of it. I'm going to vote no, and I'd like to encourage my fellow board members to do the same, because we could do better. I mean, if Marlins wanted to have a contract with us and have it and do their swimming at Kennedy, for example, or if we as a district wanted to take the money that we are providing and put it into a scholarship fund and say our students can apply for that money. If we wanted to look at, and I think we should look at, doing a rental fee, and if we wanted to look at scaling the rental fee based on the participation of the students, the IGA that we had with the Park District had a clause in there that we would, if there were at least 75% of the participants who were RPS 205 students, we would give them the reduced rate for rental. Because what our policy actually says is, it's if you have all RPS 205 students, you get one level of rental, and if you don't, then you get this other. There are things to look at, and I believe that administration had an opportunity to do that, to go back and make this better. And 3 times they brought us back the same thing with nothing to say how they not only were going to make better choices, but how they were going to get better investment by our coaches and our students. So maybe if we can go ahead and vote it down and let them come back with something better, or follow the policy as it is. Did I make that short enough? I don't know. Go ahead.
Mr.
Okay,
Scrivano.
other board member comments, or Dr. Vosberg, you wanted to respond to that?
Well, sure. Can I just make a few high-level points here? And then other specific questions or follow-up. Mr. Parker's on the line here today as well. He's more familiar with the day-to-day of this than I am. But I would just point out to the board that goal 2 of our strategic plan is to engage in partnerships that benefit our students. And Mrs. McCulloch is right. We can do better for our students, and we are not getting enough students to participate as we thought we could. She's right. There are only 5 students that are on the scholarship out of a potential of 10. We have 18 students that work that are part of the summer program. That's not a big number. We have 7 coaches that attend a clinic. You can look at the detailed spreadsheet for yourself. But I just want to explain the overarching goal here. It's twofold. One is we are trying to, and you've seen the presentation with Mr. Parker's budget. His goal is to increase participation in all athletics. I think we have 34 different athletic programs in our system. And what we found over the years, by the way, we have gradually increased participation, and we think that's valuable. The more kids that are connected to athletics, the more likely they are to be academically connected to the school. They're connected in relationships with their teammates and their coaches. So we think athletics are important to students, and we want to do as much as we can to grow our participation rate. And we have had some success with that. To do that work, sometimes it takes a partnership. We think that a couple things make a difference for that participation, and that's getting kids involved when they're young and really good coaching. And so any partnership we engage in, and Mr. Parker has outlined some other partnerships, our goal is to try to grow a feeder system with younger students while they're very interested, and then really try to get some high-level coaching. We think the club activities, these are individuals that dedicate year-round to the sport and are usually more in tune with coaching techniques and building programs. And so we think there's value in those partnerships. The second piece to this is what we call the front porch. We know that athletics are not the most important part of our system, but it's what everybody sees first. And if we're a first choice district, we think having viable and competitive sports programs factor in for parents to make choices in our programs. Swimming is a difficult sport for participation. Our district to the east, Belvedere, they actually co-op their swim team with their 2 high schools. We've actually toyed with the idea of co-opting our swim teams because the numbers are pretty low in some of our programs. We're resistant to co-op because once you co-op, then you really are going to take away some opportunities, as Mrs. McCulloch talked about with transportation. So if we were to co-op East and Jefferson or Guilford and Auburn and things like that, that really diminishes the participation numbers. So we're really trying. Have we got there yet? No. Is this program the only way we're going to get there? This agreement? No. But when we look at the value proposition for the district, we are charging the Marlins. They use the pool 22 days when it's not in use. So that's a charge that we would not normally incur. And they are charged $10,000 for that, and they pay us for that. And we are waiving $2,500 in exchange for all the other itemized things you can see in the attached spreadsheet. What we don't do is charge them, and it's not itemized here, when they use the pool on days that we use the pool. We could do that, but we are not incurring any additional cost, so we choose not to do that. I think this is a great opportunity for the board to give us feedback. If our partnerships have to, if we're looking for partnerships where we're charging full rental on every minute a facility is used, even though it does not incur extra cost to the district, then that would definitely change how we do things. We are looking at what's our real expense here. And again, the 22 days that's used in the summer are days that we would not normally use the pool. Our facilities department estimates that to be $12,500. We are getting $10,000 in payment. And then we're getting in-kind services that are itemized in that spreadsheet. And, you know, we can debate the value of those in-kind contributions. I do think there's value. 5 kids are in a club that are getting half price. That's $3,450. 18 kids are going to be in a summer camp. These are RPS kids. That's $3,150. There's a clinic with Bill Wadley. If you're familiar, that's been in the paper. Bill Wadley is a former Auburn student who coached in the Big Ten at Ohio State. He's part of this clinic where 42 students participated. So, and we get 7 coaches in a clinic that normally would not happen. So we do see value here. Do we think we're getting the best return as far as more kids participating? No, we don't. We're open to suggestions. If there's a better agreement out there from other private clubs, 401 or 501c3s, then we'd be interested. But this is the only one that's come forward in the 7 years that I've been here, or in the 9 years I've been here. Sorry.
But the contract, this is Jude, I'm going to come back at you. The contract has not changed in 7 years, despite the fact that they haven't been using things. The head coach lives in Belvedere. Her kids all swim in Belvedere. The assistant coach is the coach of the Belvedere co-op team that you spoke to. I've been told that the percentage of students that are from Belvedere that participate in Marlins exceeds the percentage of RPS 205. Today, when I talked to her, she said there's 81 students in that program. If only 18 of those are RPS 205, they should be paying for using the pool in the summer, because that's what our policy states. I think that the work to grow our students and our program, I think that they want to do it, but that what they've brought forward isn't working. It hasn't changed numbers that much. I think if you want to encourage them to have a greater percentage of RPS students that they're helping, then let's look at what we had with the Park District, with the IGA with them. What did we do? We said if you have 75%, not 100%, but if you have 75% of RPS 205 students, we're going to give you a reduced rate. Would that give them some impetus to try to increase the number of RPS 205 students? I don't know. The move of the Marlins from Flynn to Eisenhower to make it more central or whatever, because Flynn was growing their program. Why not make it easier for the Flynn students? I'm not sure why we did that. And the whole summer program, when I spoke to the coach today, she actually said to me, well, you know, nobody ever really told me that there was a summer program already being run by the coach from Guilford through the Park District at Alpine Pool 5 days a week. And it's been there since Brian May was there, however zillion years ago. And then I know Bill Miner picked it up, and I don't know where it goes from here. But she said it's no wonder I don't get good numbers in the summer, because the RPS students are going to the Park District one at Alpine Pool. I'm like, okay, so why didn't anybody look at that and make some changes? She said, I don't know. They didn't tell me to. You know, I didn't come up with anything else because supposedly what we had was working. So if it forces us to vote this down so that you look at it and make some changes, then if this is the way that we have to get administration to really make change, then that, I believe, is what the board needs to do. You had an opportunity to do it and you didn't.
Are there other board members? Go ahead, Mr. Rollins.
Yeah, so I've got different issues, I think, than Mrs. McCullough. We're talking about this in terms of partnerships, but this is a facility use arrangement. We're letting the Marlins use the facility. And the background for the newer board members who weren't on the board is that we used to have these discussions all the time about special arrangements. And so we went through a process. It was a lengthy process. It was a little bit painful. It was we had committees that had community members on them. We had community input to create a facility use policy. And I view this as, I'm just looking at this as a facility use arrangement. And, you know, from my perspective, what happened is that the administration came forward and said, well, let's let them give us some in-kind services to help pay for the facility. And I think at some point we might have said, okay, we can try that. And I think Mrs. McCulloch's point is, or one of Mrs. McCulloch's point is that they're not really providing us the in-kind services that they say they're providing us, or we're not getting that value. And to me, that's just an indication of why we shouldn't be cutting these special deals. I don't want to be having these discussions about every single entity or group that wants to use their facilities. We created a policy. We put a lot of time and effort into it. And I think we should just follow the policy. And every time we deviate from the policy, we're going to set a precedent for other people to come to us and say, well, you cut a special deal for them. Why aren't you cutting a special deal for us? I think that's bad policy. I think it's bad practice.
Okay, other board member comments?
Yeah.
Mr. Connor.
Yeah, number one, I'm going to say what I said last time is, I don't know why we're obsessing about swimming. I don't remember what other groups, athletic, arts, have had this level of scrutiny. So I'm really questioning why we're going after the swimming program. I've really heard very little about the Marlins themselves. And however we nitpick these positions, the fact is that swimming has been a part of this district for a long time. And if, I'll say exactly what I said before, if we want to make the contract better, let's go do that. I don't think the Marlins, are making a ton of money off of this. This is not some profit-making group that's here to swoop down on RPS, and just take all of our money. They are about people, and I've been contacted by a number of Marlins. This is a group who really is interested in swimming. If we want to improve the contract, I said before, I'm all for this, but I don't think the method to do this is to turn it down. Let's work with this group. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of viable alternatives. And when you get in that situation, you do have to manage it. And so again, I'm good with that. And since I was here so that's the first point, is I think we need to be committed to these sports, and RPS has to offer all the sports that we can, all the arts we can, robotics, whatever it is. And a lot of it does take partnerships because, we clearly need some help on a lot of activities. We don't have all the expertise. The second thing is, in terms of that policy, I agree. If we have facility policy, which we spent a good deal of time talking about, let's make sure that we're following that. But I think the one thing I'm going to say here is that having read that list, and what was it, like 4 pages worth of, do we get value from this or that? I think, let's look at 100 programs and see how their value is. I'm back to that same point, which is We either accept these partnerships or not. And if we want to say as a board, go make this contract better, I'm good with that. But I'm not good with us turning this down because we have a major organization that has committed decades with us. And if we want to make the facilities policy better, then let's do this standard with everything. Let's look at everything. And frankly, I think we've spent more time talking about what is a small contract and a small amount of money, and we've spent a lot of time on this. And I think we have big fish to fry. So from my point of view, let's hand it back to the administration, but let's keep our commitment to our community partners.
Okay. Any other board members?
Hey, Ken, there was one other thing that I was going to mention, I just forgot.
Okay.
So another little piece of history, which only 3 of us on the board remember. We had a discussion, and this isn't directly relevant, but I just want to talk about it. Back in 2011, we discovered that we had a middle school pool that wasn't working and that was going to take $1 million to fix it. And so some of us said, instead of, and it was an equity issue, it was the pool at Kennedy. And so some of us said, that's a lot of money, and our pools aren't really used in the middle schools. There are no other middle schools anywhere in this area that have pools. I really don't think it's an attraction. I don't think people put their kids in the schools at RPS because we have middle school pools. And so we had a debate about whether we should just simply close all the middle school pools. And, you know, I'm not trying to revisit history, although I guess I am. So in 2011, it was a 4-3 vote. The 3 people who are on the board are the ones who voted to close the middle school pools. The middle pools are expensive, and they're hard on buildings. They're expensive, not just on the direct operational costs, they're expensive indirectly because they're hard on our facilities. There are long-term costs associated with pools. So in the context of this, I'm just going to raise the question whether we ought to revisit this. I'm particularly, and I didn't learn it recently, I was told it earlier. So we spent $1 million to open the pool at Kennedy, and it was empty. No water in it this year is what I was told. It was not used. Why are we spending, with limited resources, with a board that says over and over again our focus is on academics, why are we spending this money on pools, on middle school pools? Can we
So
revisit?
putting that on the list that we talk about at the end to have that conversation?
And we can see whether people want to revisit it. But I'm going to say this may be the time to revisit it.
Okay.
Ken, this is Jude.
Yes.
I just want to say to Mike that we're saying the same thing. This contract sucks, and you're saying go ahead and move forward with it and let them change it. But they've had 3 times to change it. They didn't. So at this point in time, we need to take a vote on it. And I agree with you. If we're going to look at charging a facility fee for this, and we need to look at all the other contracts we have with whatever they are, partnerships or usage across the district, and I thought legal had done that, but I don't have any problem asking legal to look at them all and making sure that we're treating everybody the same, because that's the precedent we're trying to set, and that's what we tried to set with the policy. So thanks.
Okay. Any other board member comments? Not, I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of item 8A, the Rockford Marlins RPS partnership.
Mrs. McCulloch,
No.
Mr. Siegel,
No.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
No.
Mr. Dixon,
No.
Mr. Rollins,
No.
Mr. Scrivano.
Yes.
The motion fails by 5 noes, 2 yeses.
Okay. We'll move on now to item 8B, which is the fiscal 20 actuarial and benefits consulting services for post-employment benefit valuation and early retirement. Do I have a motion and a second to approve item 8B?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Connor, seconded by Mr. Siegel. Questions, comments, or discussion?
Well, I was pulling the other ones. This is Jude, and I was just asking for an explanation of what we were paying for. This is only a $33,000 contract.
Right.
There's nobody else. I mean, it looks like we were with them before. Actuarial means they're going to look at what numbers are they looking at? Would you just give a quick overview really fast?
I think that Mrs. Yar, this is yours, right?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
This is a requirement when we're doing our external audit. So we have to have the actuarials figure out how much our health insurance really costs to book that liability on our financial statements. So they look at all of the data from HR, look at our retirees, and it's a pretty complex process. So that's why we need an actuarial.
Perfect. Thank you for that explanation. That's much better than what I read that I didn't understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Not, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 8B.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, now I'll take a motion and a second for item 8C, which is the Lamar Company's billboard rental for our seniors.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Dixon. Questions or discussion?
Here I am again, more questions. Yes, this is Jude.
Okay.
So it says there would be 5 billboards, and it says that there would be a valedictorian and a salutatorian of each high school. Will all 5 billboards be the same with 10 kids on each of them, or is there one per school being put in their, over in their area where their school is? I didn't understand what they were doing because it came to us
Okay, Dr.
as
Vosper,
a
this is
consensus
yours.
building. Oh, and let me ask you another question. Have we already committed to these?
Yes, we're committed. We did get a verbal approval from 4 board members.
You got consensus because there was I didn't understand what the whole thing was. So go ahead. Thank you.
So yeah, each billboard would be individual per school. So there'll be five schools with their valedictorian and salutatorian on each billboard. And the billboards, the reason we rushed this, we needed the board to approve it last week, is there's a time frame for them to get the photos, to make the artwork and put them on their billboard. So in the contract, you can see the locations, and you can see that these billboards will go up May 11th, and they'll be up until June 7th, right around the graduation time, and that was our goal. I actually saw, I think maybe it's in the attachment too, but I did see a mock-up of this with students' faces on the billboard. This is a really nice touch for our kids or seniors that are going through a rough time. And I think this is the one silver lining of all this, is we may have found a new way to recognize our best and brightest. I think when you see this might be something, I know the principals and I have talked about trying to do this again next year. We think it's a really great way to recognize academic excellence, and we're looking forward to seeing these posted throughout the city.
So the reason I really wanted to have a conversation about this was we've got a lot of seniors, and you're going to put 10 faces out there on 5 boards. We've got top 25 in each school. We have, I don't know that we voted on top athletic, top, the arts person. Top. We have a lot of kids who are tops. And so to have just 10 kids for $17,000, I voted no on this, or at least we weren't voting. We were doing consensus because we can't vote, right? Unless we're sitting here in board and doing it publicly. And this is kind of after the math because you've already ordered them. But I think there are a lot of kids that could be recognized. Billboards are pretty large. And so to have 2 faces on each when other students' faces could be there, I think could have been a whole better use of money. Again, there's so many kids out there that would like to be recognized, and just 2 kids I have a problem with. So I'm a no on it, but I just thought I'd pull it for that reason. Thank you.
That's a good point.
Something real quick. Can I add something real quick?
Yes.
Sure, go ahead, June.
I think that student athletes that are at the top of their game get their accolades in a lot of different ways. I think that artistic kids get their accolades in a lot of different ways, but academically gifted kids, I mean, how are they publicly recognized? I think this is a great idea. I'm all for it. I think it's great.
June, my point is we have a top 25 per school for academics as well. I mean, you could put the valedictorian and salutarian out front, have their faces bigger, but we do have a top 25. And when you have 300 plus kids, that would look at the academics, the top academics for all of them. So I agree with you. I love, recognizing academic achievement. I totally love that. I just hate limiting it to such a small group.
Yeah, we don't like limited either. One thing we're trying to do is we did, I think this is in a board update. There are yard signs going out to all the seniors. We're having those printed by our print shop. And then we are recognizing the top 25 on the yard signs as well. And we're doing some planning with our graduation ceremony to make sure we recognize all of our seniors. It's a really unprecedented year for them, and we're going to do our best to recognize as many as possible. We did actually explore putting all the schools on one billboard. It just didn't look right, and that would give us more opportunity to recognize it differently. But this is what we came up with, and I credit the principals for in a short period of time coming up with a creative idea.
Okay. Any other comments?
Yes.
Dixon?
I had a quick question too. And I kind of just want to say that we need to recognize the seniors some type of way. If you think about it, they started off the school year with a cyber attack, and then they end the school year with COVID-19. What type of year as most seniors? I mean, that's difficult. So I think there is some type of way we need to recognize them. I guess the question that I would have is, where are the locations? Because I think the locations are vital in the sense that I think it should be spread across the whole district, so everybody can see it. It just wouldn't, to me, make sense if we have it all on the east side, or you have it all on the west side. I think the neighborhood should be able to recognize the individuals that have excelled in academics.
No, they're listed on the contract. Anthony, I don't know if you can pull it up, but there's State Street, two of them on East State Street, one on Alpine Road, another one on Alpine Road by, one on Alpine Road by Charles, one on Alpine Road by Sandy Hollow, and another East State Street in Lyford. Which ones of those are on the west side, Matthew?
That was my point.
None of those would be on the west side of the river, Mrs. McCulloch.
And why?
I can say that when we negotiated and worked on this with the billboard company, it's what's available, okay? And so they do have billboards that could be all over the city. It's just on availability. These are available, and they're in high visibility, high traffic areas, and that's why they were selected. I don't know that we turned down other locations, that these are the best locations that the principals thought they could get.
So what are the other accommodations that we're going to do to spread the knowledge of academics and what they have achieved? Because I'm pretty sure somebody from Auburn has made that list, and it would be feasible to me, to somebody that's on at least one on the west side.
Yeah.
Yep, the Auburn one's going to be, there will be an Auburn one, Anthony, and it'll be on the east side.
Yeah.
So remember, we're going to be doing yard signs, so those will be everywhere in the city, and the top 25 will be recognized in those yard signs. So we are attempting to recognize students, and if this is something we're going to do with more notice, we will do everything we can to ensure that next year's billboards, if we were to do this again, are within the zone of each high school. We'll do everything we can to do that, but there are limited spots that are available, and we'll do everything we can to address that issue for next year.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, but if you think about it, we are in a school zone district, And so for us to not put one in the zone that we say you have to go to that school in is,
So ask the question, Earl, did you
there's
go do this? Were there none on the west side available at all? There wasn't a single board available on the west side of town, on the west side of the river?
Yes, Mrs. McCulloch, our department, this was done by, I think Jenny Kemfer from Auburn led the charge on this one. Our department, we provided some advice and consent, but we did not take the lead on this. This was the principals, kind of something that they wanted to do.
There you
Well,
go, Anthony.
We will certainly pass on the advice that if we are to do this again, we will do everything we can to make sure all zones are, all billboards are as closely tied to the high school zones as possible. At the very
Okay.
short notice, I don't know that that was possible this year.
Yeah, understand. All right, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll
Hey,
on the
whoa,
approval.
whoa,
Okay, I'm sorry.
whoa. You didn't ask if there was anybody else.
Yeah, I did.
And I
Mr. Connor.
tried to talk. So
Go ahead.
I'm gonna, that this is a really good idea. Yeah, there wasn't a lot of time. There were some issues that we have to recognize, and as much sympathy as I have for the top 25, I mean, that just doesn't seem like a practical number to me. 2 right now, and then in future to do it differently, but at least the top 2 really, I think to June's point, should be recognized.
Okay, any others, comments?
Wouldn't the top 2 be the only ones recognized at graduation by giving speeches?
No, routinely, that's probably true.
Well, no, because they have the others stand up when they call them out,
The
depending on
class
the school.
president usually gives a speech too.
Okay. Are we ready for a vote then? Okay, I'll have
Sure.
coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 8C.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon,
yes.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes, yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
I assume we have to vote what we did when we emailed you our answers, so mine will remain a no.
Mr.
That's the
Siegel.
vote you used. You're just doing this one publicly.
Mr. Siegel says yes.
Okay,
The motion passes with 6 yeses and 1 no.
okay, our next item is 8D, the addendum to the Sunrise Transportation Contract. Is there a motion and a second to approve this item?
Mike Connor, yes. I mean,
Move,
so
Mr.
moved.
Connor. Is there a second?
David Siegel, so moved, or second.
All right, Mr. Siegel seconded. Comments or questions, discussion? I'll start because I'm struggling with this one, to be honest with you. I understand, that we're following some recommendation on what the state is doing, but I struggle with this one. I just don't understand why, knowing that we would only get a reimbursement of 80%, why we would offer 100% of their salary paid to them when they didn't do any work. So I'm struggling with this one. So anyone else have a comment on this one?
Yeah, this is Tim.
Sorry.
Sort of the
Mr.
same
Rollins?
thing. I'm not in favor of paying people for not providing services. And anybody who's paying attention knows that there's been huge federal relief bills that are supposed to cover this situation. So they could have, for instance, applied for a payroll protection program loan if they were eligible to cover payroll expenses. And to the extent that they either were eligible or couldn't get that loan, the federal government is funding very generous unemployment benefits. So if these people temporarily lose their because of the COVID crisis, they will be eligible for unemployment and fairly generous enhanced unemployment benefits. I don't understand why we should be using local tax dollars to be paying people who aren't providing services.
Okay. Now, other board member comments?
Yeah, I kind of struggled the same thing with this when I looked at it. But I asked a couple of questions to get a better understanding. So most districts that are size, they subtract their bus unit totally out. And our position is we subtract just a little portion of majority of our transportation, and we majority of them we do it ourselves. So these were the concerns that I had was, are we paying our people? We are paying the people, our bus drivers, we continue to pay. But when we look at subcontracts, we're in a different position in the sense that we are taking care of ours. So when I looked at that from that perspective, I came up with my answer, and I'll be against this.
So this is Jude.
Go ahead.
I'm also voting no. And what's really striking to me is the piece that they added in there about their operations. You know, initially when you brought it to us, it had just, or when it was floated to us, I don't even know if it was on the agenda. It talked about, you know, paying people wages, and people who chose to go work for a private company instead of being one of our bus drivers, that's the risk that they took. But then on top of that, when they added in their operations, which I don't know what it is, if it's debt or what it is, it's like they got greedy. And so I'm also a no vote.
Okay. Anyone from administration want to respond to any of those comments? Or Mike or anybody?
Well, let me just say.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah, I struggled also with this, but first of all, I mean, if you've read anything about that loan program, it's been, the first phase was a disaster, and there were all kinds of companies that got money that shouldn't, number one, and there was a lot of small businesses in particular that really got the shaft on that federal program and didn't get the loans for all kinds of reasons. It was administered by the banks, and the banks have not done a good job, I don't think. So I'm really, from that standpoint, I'm sympathetic. And what I'll say is, these are the subcontractors that, you know, certainly to a good extent, you can say is a local business. And I don't think that's a huge business. And so all along, I've been for supporting local business. And so what I would say is that, you know, again, if we need to improve it, that's fine. But we need to really support for local business. And that loan program, I think, has not worked well. So I think there's a lot of people that are not covered. And in terms of the benefits, those benefits are short term. And I would say this, that, you know, in a sense, you know, we have people that we depend on. And that's one of the reasons we stood to say to pay people, you know, while all this goes on. And I would just say this is a local company, and that support, I think, is critical for us to have a pipeline.
Hey,
Okay.
Ken, this is Jude. If we're
Yep.
going to ask,
Go ahead.
the person I'd like to ask is Lori Hoadley. My understanding is that the staff of this company, this private company, they're not, you know, they're not employed by the district, are eligible for unemployment. We don't know how many of them have already applied, so there's a lot of work going to be going into figuring out who has already gotten unemployment, then they don't get our money. But the other piece is, because they are a private company, they're not under the same restriction that our bus drivers would be, in that our bus drivers could not apply for unemployment during the summer. If these bus drivers have already applied for unemployment, which right now is fairly generous because of the federal input, they can continue on that unemployment through the summer because they're a private company and not a governmental entity. That is my understanding from our conversation today. Mrs. Hoadley, could you confirm that?
That would be correct. The Department of Employment Security always looks at the reason for the separation and is it attributable to the employer or to the employee. In this instance, it's really neither, but that being said, the employee would be eligible if the reason for the separation is because they were laid off.
So Sunrise would not be paying them during the summer, and at least if they have applied for unemployment, they would be able to get money during the summer as well. So I'm going to stay with my no vote.
Correct.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Slife, I think, had some comments.
Go ahead, Mr. Slife.
I can. Yes, they are getting their unemployment, or they're eligible for it. The biggest concern that the company, when I talk to them, is with not meeting their loan payments or their electric for holding the building that's here in our location, or the rent, that they won't be around when we open up in the fall. That's their biggest concern.
Okay. Further comments? All right, I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of item 8D, the Sunrise Transportation Contract.
Ms. Stanford,
No.
Mr. Dixon,
No.
Mr. Rollins,
Sorry, no.
Mr. Scrivano,
No.
Mrs. McCulloch,
No.
Mr. Siegel,
No.
Mr. Connor.
Yes.
The motion fails by 6 noes and 1 yes.
Okay, our next item is item 8E, which is the Comcast Internet Essential Sponsor Service. Is there a motion and a second to approve this item?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Comments, questions, or discussion?
Well, I pulled this one. This is Mrs. McCulloch, because it's under recurring contract, even though it's kind of a different contract with Comcast, but because it's being added on to a company we're working with already, I'm assuming that's why it's under there. But I think it's also, I also wanted to have an explanation, publicly on record, about what we're doing to try to make sure all of our families are connected. So if, I don't know if Jason or who wants to just explain on what this is and how it works and what we're going to get. It says up to 39.8, but without this, our students who have devices but no internet connection are unable to use the device, right?
Yeah. Mr. Barthel, would you like to respond to that?
Absolutely. So this, we've been working about 3 or 4 weeks with Comcast on this plan. This is a really great program for us. What we did during our surveys of parents when we were offering Chromebooks and distribution there, we also gathered data points on who had internet access. We actually had 1,252 families that responded back to us that they did not have that internet access. From that time until this time, we've worked closely with the schools to reach out to those specific families to encourage them to use the Internet Essentials program to try to apply for that on their own. And Comcast has an amnesty program that's running through June 20th. They just extended it today to June 20th to allow those families to also get that internet, which is essentially a $50 service in their home for $9.95 a month. And then we actually had, right now we're sitting at 16 families that were, for some reason or another, unable to be granted that. And that's where this internet services sponsored service comes into play. Comcast partnered with us to be able to offer the school district the ability to take on those services for the homes of those students to really attack that digital divide. And as we move forward and potentially not even starting school next year and having remote learning, we want to make sure that we're having that opportunity for every student to be able to digitally learn as opposed to paper packets and other methods. So it's a really great opportunity. The reason we presented it as a recurring contract, again, we have several Comcast services, and it's an additional feature with the Comcast services you already have. So it'll be a similar contract, but just an additional service for us.
But it's
Okay,
not a recurring contract. This is a new contract, Jason, right? With them. And then what happens next year when we continue to use devices? Because once I feel like once we are in that electronic mode, we will continue to bolster our education with that. Will we just have to continue to provide those services, or is the expectation that they'll use a connectivity at a school, at a Starbucks, a McDonald's, at a library, or will we still be on board? Or is this just because everybody's at home?
So that's a really good question. As we look at doing high school one-to-one and different things down the road, we've already started putting the wheels in motion, even as of last year during our registration process, asking those parents who have connectivity issues at home and don't have Wi-Fi. And we're going to be working here very shortly in our long-term planning with Sprint. They've got something called a 1 million project. They've been running it for about 4 years now, and what they've got, and the 1 million is they're reaching 1 million students across the United States to provide, and it's essentially a grant, and we're well in the progress with that. And what that allows us to do is provide a hotspot for students, low-income students who don't have internet access, and essentially we pay for the device, and it's 2 years free internet service. So that's our long-term plan for this. The Comcast is really our stopgap until we get to the next work, digital learning, remote learning plan going forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 8E, the Comcast Internet Essential Sponsored Service.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Absolutely, yes.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, we'll now move on to item number 10, which is the closed session consent items. We have an appointment of Desiree Wrightsell as a 10-month elementary dean at Brookview Elementary School, the appointment of Larry Goodrich as a 12-month principal at West Middle School, and the HR organizational report and addendum. Is there a motion and a second to approve these closed session consent items?
This is Mike Connor. Yeah.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second by David.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Thank you. Any comments or questions? If not, we will, or any item that they want pulled for separate consideration? If not, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the closed session consent items.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, our next item is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
Thank you, Mr. Scrivano. I just wanted to take this brief moment to provide some special recognition to our seniors, to let them know that we were thinking about them. We're thinking about all of our students, and we're proud of all of our students. But particularly, I wanted to reassure parents of seniors that our principals have been thinking about what you've gone through ever since this event happened. They started making plans, and we're going to work really hard to ensure that we have a high quality graduation experience within the parameters that we are allowed to do so. We're even looking at a much delayed attempt at a senior prom. The schools team will be putting something out as early as next week with specifics, but we've been working hard to look at what other districts across the country are doing, but also spending time asking my superintendent student advisory students and other groups, what's the best way we can meet the spirit of graduation and some of the milestones that have been severely challenged by this event. But I am confident that the spirit of our students and our community will come through. And we are going to do our absolute best to make sure we have the best possible experience for all of you under the circumstances. And I do believe that we will be stronger as a result, as a community, as a result of what we're going through right now. So thank you to all the people who are hard at work. And I specifically want to let the seniors and their families know that we're thinking about them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on now to our action items for tonight. Our first action item is the Jackson Charter School renewal recommendation. Is there a motion and a second to approve this item?
This is Mike Connor, so moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Dixon, I believe.
Sure.
Comments, questions, or discussion?
Mr. Scrivano, this is Mr. Rollins.
Yeah, Mr. Rollins, go ahead.
So, I expressed my concerns last time about going out 3 years. And yet the recommendation is to do what is some sort of modified 3-year extension. So I guess I'll give the administration a chance to talk about that. I will again express my concern, channeling my inner Mr. Escobedo, that we're not really showing an appropriate sense of urgency when we talk about giving programs 3 years to improve. So how do we see this working?
I'll interject on that, Mr. Rollins. We really took what you said to heart and immediately spent some time discussing with Jackson. And what we believe we've accomplished here is really the spirit of what the board has asked for, which is at the end of, and some of this has to do with the delay in standardized testing, frankly, with not having this year be able to count as a baseline. But we are going to be setting very clear performance targets that will be based on next spring standardized test, and we will be reviewing that the following fall. So that will, I believe, make very clear at the end of the first year, going into the fall of the second year, if Jackson has met that first milestone. That is going to be extremely important, and we want to be clear about that we're expecting improvement to 10% on the ELA and 7.5% in the math by that point. There are also some growth-based metrics as well. I believe that this team at Jackson has taken the time and effort to restructure, change their management team, focus on K-5, and I believe they are up to the challenge. But we are setting very clear targets that need to be hit from an accountability perspective. So we will be reviewing it at the same time, I believe the board had suggested, at the end of that first year. And we do want them to have time to make adjustments throughout the life of the contract, but we will be addressing that in the time frame I believe the board suggested. And Jackson has very clear targets to hit immediately.
So walk me through what happens if they don't hit that target after 2 years.
I will turn that over to Mrs. Hoadley or Dr. Wolf if he's available tonight to talk more about the specifics. But in general terms, come the fall, not next fall, but the following fall, because we'll take the test in the spring, we will have that information and those targets are in the contract. But if there, for some additional details, I'll turn it over to whoever's available out of that group.
So Ms. Goldsmith and I worked with the Jackson team, and in the contract and in the notice structure have those performance targets. As Dr. Jarrett talked about, they are ELA and math proficiency that rise annually from what past has been and within the term. They also have to meet the 50th growth percentile in ELA and math as measured on the state test, which is higher than what they've done and is higher than the district average. And failure to meet those three bright letter goals triggers a notice to you, a recommendation to you to begin the revocation and closure process. And Ms. Goldsmith did extensive legal work to make sure that all of the concepts were enforceable. And certainly, Mr. Rollins, we heard the urgency expressed by many. I think Mr. Williams and Ms. Baker have voiced that same concern. But it would be an official notice of revocation and closure to the board being triggered by failure to meet those three targets annually.
So let's just take this, let's do the timeline. So we're renewing, the charter expires June 30th of this year. So first year is June 30th, 2020 to June 30th, 2021. Hopefully there will be testing done that spring. We will receive the results of that testing in the fall of 2021. And let's say that testing does not meet your targets. So now we're in the fall of 2021. After the first year, testing doesn't meet the targets. What happens?
We bring forward to you a recommendation for you to allow us to initiate the revocation of charter and closure of the school process. It's highly controlled by law. They would then write an improvement plan that you would approve for a term of no more than 2 years in that, and failure to comply with that would lead to closure of the school. And the school is going back to RPS governed buildings.
So once a decision has been made to close, that triggers a 2-year process?
Yes, up to. And so part of our struggle right now, as Dr. Jarrett pointed out, we don't have FY20 data. Nobody in the state does. And so all of the restructuring efforts that they did in FY18 and FY19 are enforced in FY20, and we have no verifiable standardized assessment data to give us an indication on that.
But we wouldn't at this point anyway, because we wouldn't have this spring's tests until next fall. So at the point of this renewal, we would be looking at the information that we actually have. And if there's this is the first I'm hearing about this, maybe I just missed it. If there is a 2-year statutory process that we have to give somebody before we can shut them down in order to sort of turn around, you're telling me there's a statutory 2-year turnaround period. Why are we not invoking that now?
So it is an up to 2-year process. It doesn't have to be 2 years. That would be part of the process after the board voted to do that. And the school has been doing restructuring. The school has an approved plan by the state of Illinois under what Ms. Baker talked about with Illinois Empower. And it was deemed that to give them a fair shot to the families. And if we had done testing in this spring as per usual, we could have triggered that in the fall. We won't have that. And so that was part of a good faith effort to have very clear improvement targets in the contract and a level 5 notice in the structure, but to honor what the research says is about school improvement. And that's the modified contract that is before you.
Excuse me, I'd like to add to what Dr. Wolf just mentioned. With regard to the statutory time frame, the discussion was had and information was provided to administrators with respect to that statutory duration of that proposed remediation plan. So once a notice of revocation is issued, the charter gets to create their own remediation plan. It can be up to 2 years, but it doesn't have to be 2 years. And that duration is also limited by the duration of the charter agreement itself. So it's the shorter of the end of the charter agreement or their proposed remediation plan. So part of this is an assumption that they would most likely take the 2-year remediation allowed under this statute.
I'm still struggling with the question of why we wouldn't just give the notice now, trigger the 2-year remediation period, which everybody agrees, we should give you a chance to turn around. But why are we not triggering that period now? Why saying, oh, give them 2 years, and then if it doesn't work, then we'll give them another 2 years? Because that is what I'm hearing.
Mr. Rollins, my understanding is that's because we are operating under the previous agreement. And now we are enacting under a new agreement that would have these performance targets in them. So it's transparency. It's about giving them a clear target to hit for the cumulative effort of this year, which they were not able to test for, and next year to show the fruit of a multi-year restructuring plan. And so this is the ability to be clear on what we are asking for, crystal clear on 3 very specific performance targets, as opposed to not telling them what those specific performance targets were and then expecting them to hit targets that weren't clear. So we believe that this is the best way to do it, is to clearly lay out what those three core targets are in addition to the other elements of the contract. We believe that they will hit those targets, otherwise we wouldn't be entering into this. We believe that they are making progress, but that will ultimately be up to Jackson to do that work.
So going back to my timeline, after the first year, you would be in a position, if you gave them a 3-year extension after the first year, to recommend to us that we not renew. And we could make that decision after the first year of the contract and then trigger this remediation period.
So I would like to add, from the statutory standpoint, one of the conditions of issuing a notice of revocation is that one of the criteria is that the school be in the lowest performing bracket. They are in that lowest performing bracket, but a condition is at the end of that school year, if we were to close the school, we would have to have placement for the students in schools that have higher standards than the charter school. So I guess, you know, those are different things that the district has to consider with respect to any notice of revocation.
I apologize, but I need an answer from the administration. So are you telling me that with these documents, after the first year, if they have not hit the targets, that you can make a recommendation to us, that we can issue a notice of recommendation and trigger the revocation period at that point?
Yes.
Is that?
Yes, you can issue a notice of revocation essentially at this point if you voted to non-renew, or, you know, at the start of the school year. It would be a little convoluted if the board voted to non-renew and then issued a notice of revocation. But they are in the lowest performing bracket, and that in and of itself, pursuant to the statute, is grounds for issuing a notice for revocation.
So we could just trigger the remediation period now.
Yes.
So what's the downside to that?
In my opinion, the downside to that is we did not give those clear performance targets, and the other downside to that is that we would be challenged with quickly finding places for students, both in schools that are not in that bottom category, but also just in general during this time frame.
But wait a minute, if it's a 2-year period, you've got time to place students.
Right.
Noticing.
But it comes down to are we setting our partner up for success and give them an opportunity to succeed, or are we looking for a reason to end the partnership? That is not my recommendation. Is that we are looking to give a clear target, very high standards for success. This has 2 impacts for us. Number one is, if we want to have other charter partners, how you treat your current charter partners impacts that. And I think it's important that we set very clear targets for our current partner and give them every chance and every bit of support that we can as a district to allow them to hit those targets. So that is why we are recommending a look after 1 year, as opposed to immediately going to revocation.
Okay.
But to be clear, Aaron, this is Jude. We didn't have targets in the previous contract?
Not to this level of specifics. Dr. Wolf could probably give you the specifics off the top of his head better than I could.
When
Just say, did we have targets and did they meet them from the previous contract?
we did not have crystal clear targets like this, because the previous liaison to the charters did not work with the schools to enact them.
Okay, So the one thing I want to clarify also is that if you issue a notice to revocate, there has to be a period and an opportunity to cure any or remediate any of the deficiencies. So since we're at the end of the charter period, there wouldn't be that opportunity. So Ms. Goldsmith, could you please respond to that and provide additional clarity, because you had indicated we could revoke.
Yes. So at this point where we're considering renewal, if we were to non-renew the charter, which would be the clearest option, they would probably go through the appeal process, right? And at this point, we're in a transition period where the Charter School Commission is closing, and I believe as of June 30th, the ISBE is taking over that role of reviewing those appeals. So if we were to non-renew, more than likely they would either appeal to the Charter School Commission or wait for that time to appeal to the ISBE. Other than non-renewal, the other option would be to renew, but with a condition of essentially a notice of revocation as a part of the agreement. And that triggers then that statutory remediation period that they get to create. They get to create their remediation plan that can either go up to 2 years, or it would be the shorter of the 2 years or the duration of the charter agreement itself.
I guess, and maybe it's just a matter of semantics, but we can't, or maybe it's legal, we can't non-renew, trigger that revocation period, and negotiate a 2-year revocation period now?
I think as I hear what we're talking about, it sounds to me like a renewal with a notice of revocation incorporated, so that at the same time we're renewing, they are also being required to put forth their remediation plan.
And what would be the effect of that? At the end of the 2 years, if they haven't met the remediation plan, there would be no further remediation period after that?
Yes, correct. If they, at the end of their remediation period, then the charter would be revoked, and then they would have that opportunity still to appeal to the ISBE. And then
So now the reason we've avoided that is because of the appeals process risk and losing control of the relationship. What we are saying, the course we are recommending is giving this partner an opportunity to hit very specific targets over the next year, and then having that kick in at that point, as opposed to taking all of those risks with the hope that we would have a 1 year shorter term. I would choose to hope that the partner is successful with the targets that we lay out, and that they earn that extension of 3 years. But the worst case scenario, if they don't perform well, would be 1 additional year. But in what is being suggested here, we're basically going into the agreement with the belief that we're trying to get out of it as quickly as possible. And I think it's important so I believe a stronger recommendation is to allow for a good faith effort for them to hit the 10 and 7.5% mark and the 50% growth mark, along with the other elements of the contract, and that they continue to hit those more advanced targets the following year, which are 12.5% and 10%, and they continue their improvement journey, as opposed to immediately entering the relationship with the belief that they are already out and they have to hope that they are going to earn their way back in. I think it is semantics, and I think it also carries risk with it in terms of losing control of the relationship.
I guess I disagree that anybody's saying that we're trying to end the relationship. I think the difference is the emphasis on making sure that it gets turned around as quickly as possible. And when you say the downside risk is just 1 additional year, that's right. And that is my concern with this administration. I hear things like that. Just 1 additional year. Yeah, just 1 additional year of kids not. And that's an impact. A fairly significant impact. So I guess going back to question for Yashika is, if we renew for 2 years instead of 3 years, and then after 1 year, we do this notice of revocation, does that shorten the remediation period to the 1 year? Or do we still have to do 2 years?
That's correct. If you were to do a 2-year agreement and then at the end, when we get the accountability information, if they don't meet the goals, then the shorter time period would be 1 year for that remediation at the end of that charter term.
Okay. And I agree with you, Dr. Jarrett, that this is setting a tone for future charters. And I think we do need to set a tone for future
I'm not
charters.
disagreeing with that, Mr. Rollins. And so, so if the term is 2 years, that's great. I just disagree with the idea of a revocation being the basis for the new agreement.
I will make a motion then to amend the term of the agreement to 2 years.
We have a motion on the floor to amend the agreement to 2 years. Is there a second for that motion?
This is Jude, second.
We have a second. Comments, discussion?
So that we're all clear, if it's 2 years, all we'll have is the information from that second year in the fall on which to base it, which I'm going to just interject this now while we're talking about this other piece, because I've already had this conversation with Ms. Holdley and with Dr. Jarrett. You know, it's not just the numbers from the achievement aspect that are in that contract. There's a lot of other pieces in there that our charter schools are supposed to be accountable for. There is the bilingual, there's the special ed, there's doing the appropriate financial audits, there's having the 75% teachers certified, there's meeting FOIA, meeting OMA, meeting what their board composition should be. And I don't know that it's in there, Ms. Holdley or Yoshika, you're going to have to tell me, but something about truancy. I know that that was something that Anthony and I had a conversation about. But what I think is if we can't do anything until that second year anyways, that we shouldn't just be waiting that period of time, that we should be keeping an eye, and this is not just Jackson, this would be for all 3 charter schools, that we would be getting the metrics on the other pieces of the contract in September and in January, because then they can show if there's anything they weren't meeting that they have improved on it by January, for example, and then we would get them again in September, and then we would finally get the scores, the achievement scores in, when do we get them? November 1st, something like that. But I think our biggest problem is that we renew these contracts and we think it's just about academics, but it's about being about all the components, being a fair, or fair is probably the wrong word, but an equitable partner with working with our bilingual students, with working with our special ed students, with working with the public, with our Open Meetings Act. So I've already asked Dr. Jarrett this. He can comment if he has an issue with it. I think that we need,
I don't,
as a
Mrs.
board,
McCulloch. In fact, I support it, and I've already directed Dr. Wolf and Mrs. Goldsmith to work together to work with our charter partners, assuming we reach an agreement. But we will have a contract mapping tool that we will share with the board, a minimum of 2 times per year, so that we can just kind of checklist that out. We will not only do it with Jackson, but we will do it with all of our charter partners to make sure.
So I think that helps us with this vote by reducing it by a year, because then we know that even if we have to do the revocation after the first year, if they don't meet the numbers, that we'll have looked at the whole school, not just those numbers, and we'll have more information on which to make that revocation decision or decide that we want to extend the contract and give additional time. Because I do think it sounds like there needs to be opportunity, just because they've already made the changes they need to make with administration, reducing it to K-5, doing the things that they've done. But in the past, our MO has been, we renew it, and yeah, we have an annual report from somebody, but we really don't know how well the contracts are being met on all aspects. So,
any other comments?
And I just
Mr.
want
Rollins?
I just want to emphasize in connection with this that I'm not making any assumptions here. What I'm saying is, I've said this in other contexts, we need to show some urgency. We need to start putting people on shorter leashes. And so, if they're making progress in a year, that's a discussion we can have. And maybe we should be doing 1-year extensions in these situations, where if in a year from now, if they're showing progress and they maybe targets, that's a good discussion to have about whether we do a revocation notice or whether we do a 1-year extension so that they can continue to show progress. But, this business about 3 years and then we have to do a 2-year remediation plan, that to me doesn't create a sense of urgency.
Okay.
And
Any other
can I make one more? I'm
Sure.
going to make another comment.
Okay.
I think that we as a board have said, with regard to our special programs, with regard to Montessori and Barber and Haskell, and we've said, look, you guys have had time. We're not just pushing for our charter schools to do this. We want to see the same with our special programs. And so if we're going to extend the amount of time we give charters now, do we extend the amount of time that we're going to give the special programs as well? No, everybody needs to be on a short lease. We don't need to treat them differently because really they are all special programs. Our charter schools are sort of a special program in themselves, to me.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, the shorter we make the term, we are always, and I support the movement to 2 years because I think because Jackson has had a couple of years, but anytime you go less than 3 years, you are contradicting research on school improvement. So I think what Jackson with the 2 year, the reason I can support this modification is they had last year, this year, and next year. So they essentially will have 3 years. But if we are but I want to be clear to the board, as we do increase the urgency with our neighborhood schools, our special programs, our charters, which I fully support us talking about what that can look like and what that type of accountability with support can look like. I do want to be clear that year-to-year school improvement plans is not the way it's going to work. So with Jackson, what we're really saying is they have to have gotten it right the last 2 years, and that next year with the change in direction, and that next year is going to be essentially the culmination of 2 years of work. Realistically, year-to-year variance is not a good way to measure school improvement. It does need to be done over a multi-year period. So I do want to make that statement very clear to the board as we hold our own schools and our charters all accountable for improvement, that year-to-year improvement is important and we strive for it, but it is not the best way to measure the overall performance of a school.
Okay.
So I have a question.
All right. Okay, go ahead.
Did I hear correctly that if we were to change this term to 2 years, I thought I heard something that that would affect the other charters. Is that just because of the aspects that we would scrutinize more? Because those contracts would not change.
No, it does not change the other contracts, Mr. Connor. What I was talking about was a tracking mechanism. Dr. Wolf does track many of those items. We'll do a better job of displaying that. That's what Mrs. McCulloch was talking about. It would not automatically change any of the other contracts.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to amend the Jackson Charter School renewal period to 2 years. I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of that amended motion.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, are we ready to move on to item 12B then?
Scrivano?
No, we have to
Yes.
do the rest of it.
You have to vote on the original motion.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So we have a
Point
motion.
of order, Mr. Scrivano.
Yes.
Yeah. Was that actually an amendment that was proposed, or was it an actual motion?
It was
That
an
was
amendment.
voted on?
Motion for an amendment.
It was an amendment. We amended the original motion.
Okay, so the original motion should now read to be 2 years, and then all the other language is the same.
Yes.
Correct. Now, legal counsel, is that correct?
That would be correct. Now you're voting on the underlying motion as amended.
Okay, as amended. Okay. We'll have the coordinator then call on the roll on the original motion that was amended.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins.
Yes.
The motion as amended passes unanimously.
Okay, so now we can go on to our second item, which is the Kagan Professional Development. Dr. Vosberg presented this on behalf of the Eisenhower Middle School. Is there a motion and a second to approve item 12B?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions, comments, or discussion? Hearing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 12B.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins. Mr. Rollins, could you repeat, please?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, we are now on then to new business, and the administration is seeking to suspend the rules for the immediate vote to consider the TVE benchmark proposal. The curricula is part of the approved fiscal year 20 budget and is an anticipated line item for the course adoption. The purchase is made from this year's funds to be received by June 30th of this year, so that distribution can inventory and deliver the items, the distributor can inventory and deliver the items to the school for fall implementation. So is there a motion and a second to suspend the rules?
So moved. This is Tim Rollins.
Mr. Rollins makes a motion. Is there a second?
Second. This is Davis.
Second, Mr. Siegel, thank you. I don't know, questions or comments on this? We do allow?
They telling us we're suspending the rules because why?
Deliver it.
suspending-
Mrs. Detman
we're
has the
suspending
answer
the
to
rules.
that.
Sure, we're suspending the rules to ensure that we have distribution by June 30th. This is essentially the same.
Oh,
Heidi, you're
you're freezing up a little bit, Heidi.
And it was simply of being able to grab all the paper copies, ensure signatures, and
Mrs. Detman is cutting out, but I think what she's trying to
move this into the
say.
name. Sorry,
Go. Are you back on, Mrs. Detman?
I think so.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're gonna have to
Okay.
start over though.
I just, sorry, we just want to make sure that we have delivery by June 30th, which helps us ensure that we have materials ready to go for this charter.
Bottom line is there are paper materials that we're trying to order in this fiscal year.
Can you still hear me?
You keep cutting out. I think what
Let
I
Aaron
As
do
I
it.
shared last time,
Yeah,
we
we'll
just
let
had
it-
some
go ahead,
complications
Dr.
being out of the office.
So I think what Mrs. Detman is saying is that there's a time-sensitive need to order in this fiscal year, and also that there are paper and pencil deliverables that are at stake.
Okay. All right, so let's have the coordinator call the roll on the suspension of the rules.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Mr. Siegel.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, now I'll take a motion and a second to approve item 13A, the TBE benchmark.
So moved.
Second.
I didn't hear who made the motion.
Mike
Mike
Connor.
moved.
Mike Connor, okay, and Mr. Connor did, and Mr. Siegel seconded. Any
Yes.
questions or discussions or comments? Okay, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of action item 13A.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Very good. Those kids are cute. Okay. All right, Mrs. Hoadley, you're up next. Board policy revision of board policy 4.50 and 7.260.
So the first policy revision is as a result of our current operating conditions. So we are paying a lot of positions such as early childhood teachers, special ed teachers, bilingual teachers out of federal grant funds, and not just teachers, but other staff members. And so what was suggested from the grants department was to add language to the policy indicating that under unexpected or extraordinary circumstances, we can continue to charge the salaries and benefits to our current staff board as long as it's consistent with how we're paying other non-federal grant employees. So that's this policy revision. It's not a statutory change. It was one that was suggested in a webinar to our grants folks.
Okay.
This is Mr. Rollins. I've got one question. So in the second paragraph, you struck it says the treasurer is authorized to pay without further board approval, Social Security taxes, et cetera, and other recurring bills. And it used to say for essential services, and for essential services has been struck. And I guess one of my sensitivities there is that the phrase recurring bills sounds a lot like recurring contracts. And we have this continuous sort of disagreement about what a recurring contract constitutes. So I'm wondering why you struck essential services there.
Right. That was just one of the things that have been proposed by the revised press policy. Bills are not contracts, at least not certainly in my mind, and that would not change recurring contract requirements. So I'm not sure why the press changed it. That was just one of the press suggested changes, as was the blue part in the top. Or if necessary, a special meeting. That was an additional change that was suggested by press. It wasn't, and neither of those are statutorily required.
I mean, could we say something like other recurring bills for services previously approved by the board?
Sure.
Well, I mean, I do have to pay bill. I mean, we are paying bills. I mean, there are times when we have, this is Michelle, we are paying bills. You see that, during the purchasing and on the back end for example. So there are times when we really do have to pay bills that we were paying, we're paying special checks if we cannot wait for utilities, that type of thing. So I just don't want to tie our hands so much with your bills.
I don't know if you have this up, Ms. Yar, but it already refers to utilities. It's got Social Security taxes, wages, pension contributions, utility bills, but then it says and I always kind of look at sweeping general language with a jaundiced eye, and other recurring bills. So can you give me a category of other recurring bills for things that have not been previously approved by the board that you would want the approval to pay without board approval?
We have had 2 events this year, which was beneficial to be able to pay some things. I mean, a lot of things come under contract, but I mean, most of the contracts would already have been approved, and then we could pay the actual bill.
Right, which was my point. So could we just refer to recurring bills for contracts or services already approved by the board?
Yeah, I can't think of one that wouldn't be a contract.
Well,
already.
this is under new business, so just give it some thought.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I'll make that change and I'll send it to you, Michelle, as well.
Okay.
So you can look at it before the next board meeting.
Okay.
The next proposed policy change, and it's one that we should have brought forward when we made the change to board policy 6.310 to make sure it's paired correctly, but it's also broader. Basically identifies when PE is or can be waived, and that would include for special ed as well as for special ed students, or for those who are participating in interscholastic or extracurricular athletic programs. And so that is already in another policy, and Ms. McCulloch was kind enough to bring it to my attention that we had not changed this one as well.
Okay. Any comments or questions for Mrs. Hoadley? Okay, these will come back to us for a vote on May 12th at our regular board meeting. We are now on the board member and administration action steps. I wrote a note about middle school pools. So Mr. Rollins, you had brought that idea up. I think, to me, we would need to ask administration for some type of report on like cost and usage and all that kind of stuff. Would there be more than you would need on that?
No.
We'd probably ask Dr. Vosberg to do that.
Well, if we ask Dr. Vosberg to do it, I know how it'll come out.
Okay.
I'd like
There's no jaundice side.
No, I did in my due diligence for tonight's meeting. I did check with facilities. We do not have a meter on the pools to calculate the electricity that's used to heat the pool.
Oh yeah, probably all with one bill.
Yep.
So it'll be really an estimate on that piece of it.
Well, on the other, but I don't think we should ignore it, is because I can remember Mr. Schmidt talking about this quietly behind the scenes about how awful these pools are on the facilities. You know, anybody, I mean, none of us have pools in our houses, I don't think, but they're high humidity and that's bad on structures. So I don't know if you can put some sort of a number on that.
So maybe in Dr. Vosberg, I guess maybe we could get some input from operations and Mr. Phillips and whatever to help put some numbers together for us to look at it.
Okay.
Yes, we can do that.
Okay.
Well, and there's a lot of pieces to that. There's insurance as well as the others, correct? This is Mrs. McCulloch.
Yeah.
So Ken, I'm just gonna, Dr. Jarrett already has this, and he said they're already underway of putting together the piece for the charter schools, you know, so that we have the full report. The biennial piece. I'm going to add one other thing, and Dr. Jarrett's already taking care of this, and he's going to be bringing it forward as well. Our IGA with the Park District has expired. It expired in January 27th. And so just as with the Marlins and the pool and usage of our facilities or whatever, we have the Park District looking to use our tennis courts this summer. And I think that we need to have that brought to us to make sure that we're following policy on that as well. Or if we want to deviate from policy, that we have that discussion.
Okay.
Aaron, you're muted. Aaron, you're muted.
Okay. I have a list of an email that I've been crafting with 5 follow-ups from tonight's meeting. One is the Kennedy Middle School pool to ensure that we have a plan in place that swimming does run during the 2021 school year. I've already assigned that to Dr. Vosberg and Mrs. Redmond, the principal, to work with human resources to make whatever curriculum adjustments. 2, Mrs. McCulloch earlier requested during our 2-on-1 with Mr. Siegel some background on our swimming curriculum. Mr. Siegel and Mr. Siegel was in on that. I have that included here. Mrs. Detman has provided a response. We will do a report on swimming pool usage. We will modify the charter agreement as to maximize the 2-year agreement and attempt to come to terms with Jackson around that. And we will also do the developed checklist for all 3 charter providers that closely aligns with the contractual language. And I will bring forward per Mrs. Hoadley or with Mrs. Hoadley or her designee, an updated facility proposal for summer park district use of the Guilford High School tennis courts. And that prioritizes RPS use and requires payment of utilities. That is the way past practice has unfolded for about 3 decades, and I do want to bring that forward to you. So those are the 5 that I was able to capture from tonight. Did I miss anything?
I would like to suggest the tenor of the conversation with turning down the Marlins contract, I thought, was that we were going to, if you will, not my words, force the administration to come back. So I'd like to make sure that that is on our list to come back with a revised contract for the Marlins.
Okay.
And then the other thing I'm going to say is,
Can I interject? Because I want to be clear. I heard really two messages tonight about the Marlins contract. One is we don't want to do any waiving of in-kind contributions for the fees. So that if that's the sentiment of the majority of the board, then there won't be another contract. The other overwhelming voice was we need to get a whole bunch of kids participating through the participation of this contract. And again, I didn't respond to that earlier, but I just want to be clear. I put it on ourselves, our own teachers and coaches and our ADs for having low participation with that agreement. I don't really put that on the Marlins to help us recruit students. They don't have the relationships with kids in the building. So if those
Mrs. McCulloch did give a suggestion of kind of sliding scale, which is the first I've heard of that suggestion, and it seemed promising to me, but it depends on if the board wants us to just not do any deviation. Dr. Vosberg is correct that there were 2 sentiments expressed. One is no deviation, the other is improve the contract. And I don't know that I think we heard both messages depending on which board member.
Maybe we need to recruit them to teach the swim classes at Kennedy.
No, that's totally ridiculous.
No, actually, Mike
what other organization do we force them to teach kids like that? Name one. Name one organization.
Mike, can I tell you that suggestion came from the head coach of the Marlins to me? I didn't make it up. She's the one who said we could offer swim classes to your kids at Kennedy. It might not be within the school day, but we could at least step up, and would that be something of value to the district? So Mike, that didn't come from me, that came from the Marlins.
The point is we need swim programs, and I'm hearing all kinds of stuff, and we're putting all kinds of, if you will, from my point of view, restrictions. I think, let's bring this up because, if you're going to hold swimming to this standard and this one group, then we should talk about everything, because that's what you're implying. Otherwise you are singling out swimming. So I want to know, are you singling out swimming, or do the same rules apply to everybody?
We didn't have contracts come to us individually about tennis or golf or any of those things. They happened within the park district in response to the other IGA. Personally, I feel swimming is more important than tennis or golf. A kid falls in a pool, they can die if they can't swim. I think it's a life skill that we should be responsible for. But it's obvious that we're not taking that responsibility seriously if we don't even open a pool at a middle school in a community of students who probably don't have access to swim lessons through whatever, the Y and peak
I'm
and
not
those kind of
disagreeing with
things.
that basic point, but this is all, my point would be, if we want to encourage swimming and other athletic programs, or again, robotics, I'd name your type of program, it seems to me we need partners. And my point would be, let's work it out with some partners, but not hold up, partnerships with people so that we nitpick every contract. The point is, we probably do need help for kids to learn swimming, but to tie it to the Marlins isn't necessarily the best way. And all I'm suggesting is, if we're going to put this kind of scrutiny to this one program, then we need to talk about, it happens that a contract came up, and so we're going to land on this one organization. That's what's sticking in my craw, is that we're really, this is a good group of people who really are trying to do what anybody in any activity does, which is to promote their activity. And so all I'm saying is that it should come back, and we should have some means of criteria on when we're going to rake people over the coals, because that's what this is.
Well, I leave it to administration to bring it back.
Well, I think the initial question that Dr. Vosberg asked is a good one, because my perspective, I guess, is different than both of yours. I think that the discussion and the tone of the discussion is exactly why we don't want to be doing this. We have a policy, and we should just follow the policy. And we are, well, I've been on the board for 9 years. We are horrendously bad at tracking these special deals where we supposedly get in-kind services. We've never been good at it. We're never going to get good at it. So let's just get out of the business.
So as a compromise, can I propose that I will say will be explored by administration, and we can have further conversation. I will say revised Marlins contract with potential incentives for increased RPS participation will be explored by administration. I will put that so that we are honoring all of the requests. And as I have future conversations with the board, we can make a determination whether we think that there's value in bringing a revised contract back.
Okay.
We may or may not do that depending on how the tenor of how that goes.
Okay, but then number two is I want to talk about that facilities then, because I get it differently. From my point of view is we should be paid and all the rest. And yes, any of that can get, that it can be put to extremes. But one of the things with the public schools, from my point of view, and this is just me, is that we have relationships with the community. And because we're not particularly good at the in-kind, then let's figure out a way of leveraging our facilities for the benefit of the community that has put their money into this. And I will point out, and I know it's unpopular, is that the centers that we built are used by more than sports. And it is a community outreach. And it seems to me that that is one of the things that should be part of our general community relationships. And so I do want to talk about what do we do with that facilities. And when we started having this conversation for real in 2014 or so, about, I think that's worth revisiting. And I don't want to tie this one group to it. I want to have a general conversation on that. To Mr. Rollins' point, is what are we going to do on that? And I will stake out my position, which is I think we should work this out. I don't think it should be, and I will say this, the relationship with the Park District, that for whatever downsides it is, they are a worthwhile partner, and we should be working to work with these other people, not sitting back on the facility side and saying, well, meet this or too bad. Is the whole idea of partnerships is things go back and forth. So I do want that discussion separately as an entire thing.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Ken,
Yes.
may I ask Ms. Hoadley? Hey there. Could you tell us why, when the Park District IGA was up in January, why it wasn't brought back and renewed? What was it that worked really well on it or didn't work well, but especially why is it we don't wish to continue?
I can't, Mr. Parker and the superintendent can speak to what really worked well on it because they have more details on that. I think where we did not, we ended up on the wrong side of the ledger, where then keeping better books and everything, we ended up where we were going to have to pay them a significant amount of money if we kept the partnership going the way it was, with the taking a look at what was in-kind services and all of that. And then there was disputes as to the amount we were being charged on the books versus what they would charge a general member of the public. So there were a lot of issues where it just wasn't successful with maintaining the books. Dr. Jarrett, do you have anything you want to add on that?
Okay, Lori, before you push it on to Dr. Jarrett, so we have now gone back to where the Park District pays the utility or usage fees that we have in our policy. Is that correct?
Well, they really haven't been using our facilities all that much.
Right. Bottom line, one thing
right now.
What changed in the agreement largely is they stopped needing our facilities when they built their big basketball complex and some other things. But Mrs. Hoadley's correct about the accounting and things like that. Again, I just think we have to decide how much of our time we want to spend on things that are this low of an economic impact. We have needs to have strong strategic partnerships, and I think Mr. Connor has highlighted that very eloquently. I think you've all made excellent points about the importance of making sure we are getting what we pay for in these types of agreements and the need for improvement in monitoring. So there certainly is a lot to go around. I just think we have to decide how much time of our precious time we want to continue to devote to these types of topics. And if you look at the percentage of time this evening we spent on swimming related topics, it even exceeded the charter school conversation, which was the epitome of talking about student achievement. So I think we always have to reflect on that. So I will bring back the Marlins as the 6th point if we'll explore bringing that back based on the multitude of feedback we've gotten from the board. But we will ensure that if we do so, there is significant board feedback on the front end so that we don't engage in another 45-minute conversation on swimming.
Well, no, but as Tim said, we wouldn't have spent the time if we just followed policy.
Well, and we have a different, and we clearly have clear direction from some members of the board about that, and the majority of the board. So that direction was very helpful. It will let us know how to guide future partnerships.
Okay.
Move to adjourn. Move to adjourn.
Yeah. There is a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
I'm sliding in my chair.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Well, same sign. We are adjourned at 9:27.
Thank you.
Be well, everybody.